The genesis of the combat glider was forged in paradox. The punitive restrictions of the Treaty of Versailles inadvertently created the perfect laboratory for Germany's most audacious military innovation. Forbidden the roar of engines, German ingenuity found expression in the silent wing. What appeared to the world as a vibrant civilian sport was, in reality, a deep pool of technical expertise. This sport was subsidized and celebrated, creating skilled pilots waiting for war. Hermann Göring recognized this potential as early as 1922. He saw the glider not as a toy, but as a silent wedge for air power. This vision was crystallized by the work of Dr. Alexander Lippisch. His flying observatory proved motorless flight could indeed carry cargo. Later, General Ernst Udet foresaw the glider's ultimate purpose. He championed the Trojan horse tactic, striking deep behind enemy lines with surgical precision. This silent birth of a new weapon was heavily influenced by a secret parallel revolution taking place in the East. Under the 1922 Treaty of Rapallo, German officers like Kurt Student spent years at the Lipetsk airfield. They covertly observed Soviet Russia's own staggering advancements. Driven by logistical necessity across their vast, resource-strapped land, the Soviets had quickly achieved a scale of airborne warfare that dwarfed initial German efforts. By 1935, Minister of War Kliment Voroshilov boasted that the Soviet Union held a monopoly on parachuting. This claim was underpinned by maneuvers at Kiev, where entire divisions, equipment, and even armored vehicles were transported thousands of miles by gliderway. Germany took these lessons in scale and logistical daring and refined them for tactical surprise. For German planners, the glider offered a decisive advantage over conventional paratroopers. Parachute drops were prey to wind and dispersal. They often resulted in scattered units that took hours to assemble and enter combat. The glider, championed personally by General Student as the attack glider, promised unit cohesion. It offered rapid deployment and immediate combat readiness. These qualities perfectly aligned with Hitler's imperative for speed and surprise, overcoming initial military skepticism. The DFS 230, engineered by Hans Jacobs, became the vehicle for this new doctrine. It was a robust, silent transport, ready to deliver troops directly onto the objective. Meanwhile, the military establishment in Britain and the United States remained mired in old thinking. They deemed the glider's military value negligible. While Germany had a deep pool of pilots and established doctrine, America and Britain lacked comparable capability. Even by December 7, 1941, they possessed no combat gliders, no trained pilots, and no idea of the tactical revolution that had just occurred. The definitive proof of concept arrived in the grey mists of May 10, 1940, at 05:05 hours. The assault on Fort Ebenezer was not merely a battle, it was a military revelation. 78 German glidermen, descending like enormous hawks, landed silently onto the fort's roof. They landed virtually into the mouths of its huge casemates. Their weapon, the 100-pound hollow charge, was a fiendish invention. It was capable of atomizing steel and causing indescribable havoc within the concrete labyrinth. The operation cost only 6 German lives. It saved an estimated 6,000 ground troops and bypassed a costly conventional attack. The speed and psychological shock shattered the perception of German invincibility. It jarred and baffled generals accustomed to World War I tactics. Legends immediately circulated, speaking of nerve gas, treachery, and sabotage. These myths were fueled by the sheer impossibility of the feat. But the reality was far more profound. It was a meticulously planned demonstration of a new military stratagem. The silent approach and ability to land directly on the objective transformed rivers from formidable barriers into mere waypoints. The glider had proven itself a potent weapon of surprise and speed. The resounding success at Ebenezer immediately spurred ambition. If a small glider could take a fort, what could a colossal glider achieve in a full invasion? The demand for silent troop landings for Operation Sea Lion, the planned invasion of Britain, drove the pursuit of heavy lift capability. This led to the ultimate expression of glider gigantism, the Me 321 Gigant. It was a monstrous wooden aircraft capable of carrying 24 tons, or 200 men. The challenges of towing such a beast underscored the impossible scale of the ambition that German tactical success had unleashed. Towing required the perilous Troika tow of 3 Me-110s or the fused 5-engine He-111Z Zwilling tug. The glider, born of civilian sport and military secrecy, had dramatically altered battlefield dynamics in a single silent morning. Emboldened by the silent conquest of Eben Email, the German military wasted no time in proving the glider's ability to bypass natural barriers. When Lieutenant von Suden's parachute artillery unit could not be air-landed to seize the vital Corinth Canal Bridge in Greece, glider pilot Wilhelm Fulda stepped forward that challenged the skepticism of Major Graf Uexküll with a simple, confident declaration. "I can do it for you," he said. "I have gliders." On April 25, 1941, Fulda's small force swooped down on the defenders. The defenders, weary from days of combat, mistook the approaching gliders for bombers and ducked into their emplacements. The Germans seized the bridge, prompting elated shouts that gliders had again won the day. Although British fire ultimately destroyed the bridge, Fulda's foresight and determination earned him the Knight's Cross. This tactical success was merely the prelude to the first true airborne war. The strategic imperative to seize Crete, known as Operation Merkur, demanded the full commitment of General Kurt Student's forces. Crete was a critical stepping stone to the Suez Canal. The timeline was agonizingly tight, dictated by the impending invasion of the Soviet Union. As troops marched to their gliders, security was paramount. They were allowed no unit insignia and no private papers. Glider pilots carried the grim essentials of deep penetration warfare. These included contraceptives and a German-English phrasebook. The flight to Crete was a grueling ordeal, a delicate, hazardous task over water, but the landing itself was catastrophe distilled. At Maleme airfield, gliders, silent as ghosts after the deafening bombing, came sweeping in only to be met by torrential fire. The flimsy craft, devoid of defense except speed, were ripped apart. Gliders hit trees with wingtips, spinning into chaos. Their interiors turned into a tumble of splintered wood, ammunition boxes, equipment, and bodies. In one field, 5 gliders crashed in rapid succession, killing every man aboard. The chaos claimed General Lieutenant Wilhelm Süßmann, commander of the 7th Flieger Division. His glider, burdened by typewriters and bulky packages placed too far back, suffered a dangerously shifted center of gravity. Caught in excessive turbulence, the craft lost lift and smashed into the ground. It was an unnecessary, avoidable tragedy. Despite the ferocity of the defense, glidermen achieved initial agonizing gains. Major Braun's men seized the critical Tavronitis Bridge despite facing wicked fire from trenches above, but the cost was staggering. By the end of the second day, 14,000 Germans had landed at the price of thousands of wounded and dead. They also suffered the loss of irreplaceable aircraft and equipment. The bloodletting on Crete proved to be the turning point that soured the German high command. The high losses among the Fallschirmjäger irrevocably cooled the enthusiasm of Hitler and Göring for large-scale airborne operations. Ambitious plans, such as the massive invasion of Malta, were shelved. German glider units, once the spearhead of surprise, were gradually repurposed for the more mundane task of cargo transport. They tested Me-321 Gigantes for supplying the Eastern Front. The revolutionary weapon had been blunted by its own success and the resulting high attrition. Meanwhile, across the Channel, the Allies were scrambling to catch up. Winston Churchill, facing the possibility of invasion, issued his PMW directive. He demanded a 5,000-man airborne force, as meant developing British capabilities from scratch. Major J.F. Rock and Lieutenant Colonel P.B.N. Davis rapidly organised the central landing establishment. The British Glider Pilot Regiment was formed under Major George Chatterton. Chatterton set a unique standard, insisting pilots must possess high soldierly standards. They had to be trained to live with and in the atmosphere of their aircraft, ready to fight as infantry upon landing. Santiago. They developed the all-wood Horsa and the tank-carrying Hamilcar, racing against time. The American program, initiated by General Henry H. Arnold, quickly devolved into institutional confusion. Despite the dynamism of leaders like civilian soaring expert Lewin B. Barringer, the effort was described as one that started in confusion and will undoubtedly end that way. The program was plagued by a plague of conflicting directives issued by the military and critical manufacturing flaws. The Robertson Corporation crash, on August 1, 1943, exposed systemic issues. A glider wing disintegrated mid-demonstration. Colonel L.M. Johnson reported that inexperienced inspection personnel and inadequate equipment were prevalent nationwide. The Allied program reached its nadir during the invasion of Sicily in July 1943. Operation Ladbroke, aimed at securing the Ponte Grande Bridge near Syracuse, was a catastrophic failure of planning and execution. Brigadier Chatterton expressed open disbelief at the prospect of using American gliders. They had insufficient tow aircraft and pilots who had logged only a few hours in the CG-4A. The gliders themselves arrived in Africa unassembled in crates, often missing vital parts. The flight to Sicily was a nightmare. Buffeted by a gale from the northwest, formations struggled to fly low over the Mediterranean. Ocean spray lashed the aircraft, navigational aids failed, and the chaotic approach disorienting searchlights, flak, and smoke led to gliders being released miles from their intended landing zones. Many crashed into the turbulent sea, resulting in widespread drowning. Of the 137 gliders in the main force, 133 were lost. Troop carrier pilot errors, sometimes due to flak or overeagerness, dissolved formations. This forced pilots like Captain Johnny B. Blaylock into near-impossible maneuvers. Brigadier Hicks and his pilot Chatterton crashed into the sea, forcing them to swim ashore under fire. The operation resulted in 605 officers and men missing, almost certainly drowned. Sicily exposed critical, costly flaws in Allied training, logistics, and planning. L.Y. Lieutenant L. Withers's platoon managed to secure the bridge despite the chaos. The operation fueled an internal debate among American military leaders. Secretary of War Stimson leaned towards the view of costly futility. Lieutenant General Leslie J. McNair advocated for restricting airborne operations to battalion size or smaller. The glider troops themselves, often arbitrarily assigned and facing impossible odds, grimly adopted a bitter, ironic slogan. "Join the glider troops," they said. No flight pay, no jump pay, but never a dull moment. They were fighting a war not just against the enemy, but against nature, organizational indecision, and the flimsy, thin canvas contraptions that were their only transport. The Eagle's talons were still dull, but the brutal lessons of the Mediterranean were finally beginning to sharpen them. The Allied glider program, despite its monumental industrial output of nearly 16,000 aircraft, remained crippled by organizational paralysis. The inherent friction between the Army Air Corps and the Army regarding doctrine and control created a constant demoralizing drag. The Air Corps often viewed the troop carrier command as not combat. This led to discriminatory equipment assignments that needlessly endangered men and poisoned morale. They lacked self-sealing gasoline tanks, for instance. Compounded by inadequate training and constant reassignments to mundane cargo missions, the glider trooper became, in the words of one officer, a most unwanted stepchild. Logistical realities added to the burden. The crated CG-4A gliders were nearly the largest shipping containers of the war. This logistical nightmare forced the War Department to immediately reduce the number of glider regiments in airborne divisions. To counter the pervasive fear that the canvas and steel tubing craft were little more than flying coffins, dramatic gestures were required. Famed barnstormer and glider instructor Lieutenant Colonel Michael Mike Murphy, eager to debunk the death trap perception, once dared to fly General Ridgway in a CG-4A. He offered to perform loops and rolls just to prove its airworthiness. While Murphy calmed some fears, the gliders themselves often suffered from fatal flaws. Supply officers, focused solely on maximizing payload, routinely disregarded the technical limits. Troops unaware of the danger added non-regulation items like extra ammunition and food. This led to critical overloads that would soon result in catastrophic structural failures and the tragic death of pilots and passengers. The chaos of the Mediterranean was a world away from the steamy, lethal jungles of Burma, where gliders found their most specialized, long-range purpose. General Orde Charles Wingate, the visionary behind the Chindit deep penetration operations, recognized the glider's unique ability to bypass the enemy's entire defensive structure. In 1943, he championed Project 9, which became the first air commando force. Gliders were essential for hauling supplies, including the indispensable pack mules. Initially, there was concern about the mules' cantankerousness, but after a simple suggestion from an apologetic private with civilian mule skinning experience, the animals became tranquil and adaptable glider riders. They calmly endured turbulence and landing shock. The first major hurdle arrived just hours before Operation Thursday in March 1944. 80 CG-4 gliders were prepared for takeoff. However, reconnaissance photography revealed that the Japanese had camouflaged the Piccadilly clearing. They created an anti-air landing barrier that would mean sure death to the gliders. This forced a desperate, last-minute shift to the Broadway landing zone. The takeoff itself was a straining effort. Aircraft struggled heroically under the burden of critically overloaded gliders. At Broadway, Major William H. Taylor landed first, narrowly missing an elephant watering hole. The ensuing scene was pure terror. Gliders piled into, onto, skipped over, and crashed headlong into other gliders. The chaos was so intense that the terse message, Soyalink, meaning send no more gliders, crackled through the ether. Despite the high attrition, the glider's tactical value in the China-Burma-India theater, when Japanese tanks attacked the 77th Indian Infantry Brigade on March 26, 2 gliders successfully delivered anti-tank guns the following day. This action saved the brigade from destruction. Later, securing Midkina South Airfield became the critical objective for Merrill's marauders. Gliders were essential for the quick stroke. They landed engineering equipment and personnel to secure and repair the field. This enabled air transport operations that would sustain the advance through the monsoon. While the Allies struggled with insertion, the Germans mastered extraction, AFA. Collapsing fronts, gliders became crucial for saving lives and material. During the 1943 Kuban siege, gliders delivered vital supplies and then became mass evacuation transports. Over 5 weeks, some 82,000 isolated soldiers and their equipment were rescued. Up to 7,000 troops were flown to safety daily at the peak. But the most dramatic non-conventional use was political. Hitler, believing Benito Mussolini's continued existence was vital, ordered SS Hauptsturmführer Otto Skorzeny to execute a high-stakes rescue. The target was a hotel perched atop Gran Sasso Mountain. The operation demanded a tense glider approach to an improbable, boulder-studded triangular ledge. Mussolini later described the operation as the boldest and most romantic of all. Skorzeny's team landed with desperate precision, dashed into the hotel, and extracted the dictator. This demonstrated that the glider, in the hands of special forces, was the ultimate tool for surgical, deep penetration missions. The constant logistical failures, the high cost of operations like Ladbrokes, and the ongoing inter-service friction finally forced a reckoning. By August 1944, the Allies attempted to standardize doctrine and centralize control. They formed the first Allied Airborne Army under Lieutenant General Louis H. Brereton. This was a critical turning point. It was an acknowledgement that the piecemeal, chaotic approach to airborne warfare was unsustainable. The glider had earned its way into the ranks of qualified war materiel, but it desperately needed a unified command structure to realize its full strategic potential. The glider war, born in the silent fields of Germany, reached its chaotic, bloody climax in the massed airborne assaults of 1944 and 1945. D-Day, June 6, 1944, marked the moment the glider shed its experimental status and became a combat staple. Released in the darkness over the Cotentin Peninsula, the initial landings were a testament to the raw hazards of airborne insertion. Flawed intelligence regarding field sizes, combined with malfunctioning Eureka beacons and the omnipresent threat of Rommel's asparagus, turned the small, hedgerow-lined fields of Normandy into a death trap. Gliders crashed into 70-foot trees, their wings instantly severed. Others came to violent, abrupt halts in fields often too short for a safe approach. The cost of delivering vital heavy equipment was immediate and high. Brigadier General Donald Pratt, Assistant Commander of the 101st Airborne, was one of 2 American generals to land by glider. His craft's center of gravity was tragically altered by armor plating under the co-pilot's seat. This contributed to a fatal crash that killed him instantly. Yet, the gliders delivered. Missions like Chicago successfully brought 1650 7mm anti-tank guns and 24 jeeps, as they were crucial assets for the lightly armed paratroopers. The most celebrated success of the night belonged to the British glider pilots targeting the Colne River Bridge, later immortalized as Pegasus Bridge, and Staff Sergeants J. H. Warwork and J. Ainsworth executed a landing of desperate precision. They smashed their Horsa glider directly onto the objective. The crash, followed by the rustling of fabric, woke Madame Gondry at her nearby inn. Peering out, she and her husband were struck dumb by terror. They mistook the blackened, camouflaged soldiers for German paratroopers. It was only the lack of guttural orders and the sight of the men's coal-black faces that brought Monsieur Gondry to tears, signaling the dawn of liberation.
Major R.J. Howard's men swiftly deployed a PIAT anti-tank weapon.
They destroyed German armor and created the illusion of a larger battle through exploding ammunition. One Hamilcar glider landed precariously, but its Tetrarch tank rolled immediately into action, securing the strategic crossing. Despite the chaos, the gliders proved their worth. The disastrous D-Day +2 British operation saw 696 gliders decimated due to bad weather, heavy flak, and the absence of Allied fighter cover. Yet, engineers worked frantically under fire, using bulldozers delivered by glider to clear the strips. This action ensured the airhead could be sustained. The pinnacle of glider deployment arrived with Operation Market Garden in September 1944. It was a massive daylight gamble to seize the Rhine bridges. The American transport column was described as a swarm of angry bees. It was a continuous stream of hundreds of aircraft and gliders, stretching for miles, overwhelming German ground troops into inaction. Yet, the meticulous planning, dictated by the need to avoid heavy flak concentrations, forced the selection of landing zones miles from the critical objectives. General Brereton had expressed his grave concerns, warning that such dispersion destroys its tactical integrity. Gliders carried thousands of troops and tons of equipment. An enterprising musician even played the regimental march as his troops landed at detention of Francais birth. The distance between the airborne divisions and the advancing ground forces proved fatal to the operation's ultimate success. As the war entered its final brutal winter, gliders provided critical support during moments of extreme crisis. Then the Germans encircled Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge in mid-December. Artillery ammunition dwindled to fewer than 10 shells per gun. Bad weather grounded conventional parachute drops for days, making glider resupply the only option. Despite the mission being scrubbed on Christmas Day, the airmen returned on December 26th and 27th. They flew 50 glider plane combinations from France into the teeth of intense flak. Pilots like Lieutenant O.B. Blessing and Flight Officer Charles F. Sutton endured a terrifying descent through tracers and 20mm rounds. The gliders shuddered violently, their fabric shredding, but they landed, delivering vital surgeons, medical supplies, and over 100,000 pounds of cargo. This effort sustained the encircled division until the advance could resume. The largest and most coordinated airborne assault in Western history, Operation Varsity, crossed the Rhine in March 1945. Hera gliders were deployed with surgical precision, landing after paratroopers had secured the landing zones. The operation began under a bright, clear sky. However, the preceding bombardment had created an artificial haze that inadvertently shielded the incoming armada. The descent was a visceral shock. There was the roar of the wind, the violent vibrations, and the immediate crackle of incoming fire. Howard Cowan, a gliderman, vividly recalled the transition from prayer to combat. Bullets ripped through the fuselage and hot lead whining overhead. Sergeant J.H. Jenkins' glider was lost in smoke and cloud, forcing him to navigate a blind box turn using only a compass. He landed precariously in a soft field, his wingtip catching a tree. As his men unloaded, 2 passengers were immediately sniped. When a bullet pierced his thermos of tea, Jenkins' co-pilot cursed the muck, being a foot above the tracer fire. Jenkins responded with dark resignation. Oh well, it was probably cold anyway. Despite the chaos and German defences, which hit 140 of the tug planes, 90% of the gliders landed on or near their objectives. The unprecedented scale and synchronization of Varsity overwhelmed the German resistance. An unbroken stream of tugs and gliders delivered thousands of men, tanks, and guns. By nightfall, organized opposition in the British sector was broken. The glider, once an unwanted stepchild, had proven itself a decisive weapon. It was capable of breaking the enemy line and facilitating the final link-up with advancing ground forces. Yet, even in this triumph, the glidermen were left in a precarious situation. Their pilots lacked adequate weaponry, underscoring the persistent organizational failures that would ultimately doom the technology despite its combat credibility. the Second World War would ultimately remain the world's only glider war. Despite the undeniable combat proof achieved at Eben Mil, Corinth, and the Rhine crossing, the revolutionary potential of the silent assault weapon was tragically stifled. It was stifled by a lethal combination of conservatism, inter-service rivalry, and outright ignorance among senior military leadership. The institutional structure was fundamentally broken. The gliders belonged to the Army Air Corps, but the troops they carried belonged to the Army. This lack of integrated command ensured the glider program was perpetually underfunded, underprioritized, and misunderstood. The glider trooper, often arbitrarily assigned to the program, remained an unwanted stepchild. He was sent on a terrifying one-way journey into combat, with no possibility of return. The paratrooper, at least, had a chance for extraction. The Air Corps, fixated on the prestige of strategic bombing, viewed troop carrier work as not combat, further eroding morale and limiting resources. This conventional thinking, establishment-minded military mentality failed to grasp the glider's true strategic capability. This failure of vision prolonged the war. The author suggests that Generals Arnold and Marshall, though eager for bold airborne penetrations, missed the glider's most crucial logistical potential. In August 1944, gliders could have been used to block the retreating German forces at the Falaise Argentine pocket. The opportunity was lost. Later, the ability to airlift vital supplies, especially fuel, directly to advancing armored columns like Patton's, was tragically ignored. Gliders were uniquely equipped to perform this feat. As the war wound down, the focus shifted from expendable assault craft to reusable heavy-lift transports. The painful lessons of Sicily and Normandy spurred desperate technical innovation aimed at correcting the glider's inherent limitations. The most critical advancement was the snatch pickup technique. This method was demonstrated by a C-47 towing a glider at 140 miles per hour. It revolutionized recovery, proving gliders were not purely disposable. The technique put less strain on the tug's engines than a conventional takeoff. It saved thousands of aircraft and dramatically improved logistics by allowing the evacuation of wounded and the recovery of valuable equipment from unimproved fields. Engineers simultaneously pushed the boundaries of size and speed. Specialized heavy-lift designs emerged, intended for the final invasion of Japan. These included the Leicester-Kaufmann XCG-10A and the Waco CG-13A. They were capable of carrying 2.5-ton trucks or howitzers. The need for faster delivery led to the Chase XCG-14A, designed to be towed at 275 miles per hour by a P-47 fighter. Most radically, American ingenuity sought to bypass the limitations of new construction entirely. The XCG-17 concept involved stripping the engines and equipment from existing C-47 aircraft. This converted them into massive, 15,000-pound capacity gliders. It was a logistical solution born from the desperation of supplying China over the hump. This intense experimentation culminated in the XCG-20, an all-metal monocoque glider with a rear ramp. Though developed too late for the conflict, its advanced design laid the foundation for modern air transport. When fitted with J-47 jet pods in 1951, the XCG-20 became the XC-123, America's first jet transport. This was a final ironic evolution that saw the motorless aircraft finally gain its own power. Across the globe, however, the momentum was fading. The immense cost and complexity of coordination, coupled with the sheer availability of surplus C-47s and other powered transports post-1945, made the glider an increasingly difficult proposition to justify. Even the Soviet Union, the glider's original pioneer, showcased its final spectacular designs at the 1949 Aviation Day Show. The Yak-14 and TS-25, large aircraft capable of carrying dozens of troops, were paraded in spectacular glider trains. But this display was a swan song. Strategic priorities shifted, and the Soviets soon offloaded their remaining gliders to Czechoslovakia. This effectively ended their military glider development. By the early 1950s, the dream of silent, surprise air power had died. Britain disposed of its remaining glider fleet. While glider orientation rides were still given at Fort Benning, the American program was effectively dismantled. The systemic failures, the vacillation, the lack of doctrine, and the resistance to change had prevailed. The combat glider. that vital, unique, and powerful weapon, was left as all but a memory. Its former armada was reduced to rusting relics. It was the wooden sword of World War II. It was a technology of unsurpassed tactical importance, whose full strategic potential remained tragically unrealized. This stands as a stark lesson in how military innovation can be sidelined by the momentum of the conventional.